In a world stained by sin, two men stand united to bring the light of biblical truth to the masses.
The Bereans were more noble than others because they searched the scripture to see if these things were so.
2 shotguns, 7 shells, and 10 tons of courage against a juggernaut of questionable doctrine and theological compromise. We are the Bearded Bereans. And now, the Bearded Bereans.
My granddaughter thought I trimmed it the other day. She went off at me.
All right. We are now live on the stream. I see us pop up on Facebook, or on YouTube, rather. It should be on the Facebook groups as well. Looks pretty fancy.
Why do you do this to us? What do you do this to me for, Larry?
Hey, your beard looks good. Did you trim it up?
Nope, I just put some wax going, man.
I was going to say, it looks very straight at the bottom.
Yeah, I got a $4.95 delivered beard comb and a beard butter sort of test thing. And pretty nice. Smells pretty good. Smells pretty outbacky, lemongrassy, lemon myrtle smell.
Lovely. So we have Todd with us, the first-time caller, right? Long-time listener.
I can never find you guys anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know if my podcatcher I use can find you.
Well, we only did a few.
We're on iTunes, Spotify, Spreaker, everywhere, man.
Yeah, I use Castbox. I'll have to look again.
Okay. Catchbox.
Castbox, yeah.
Have you heard of the fantastic app called PlayerPod? Brought to you by Todd Moore. Slip that ad in there, Larry. You can put that in there later.
Yeah,
you can't live.
I've actually used it before. It works really well.
It is.
We kept putting it in. Yeah.
There's this little podcast app that I use, and I've been plugging it for a while, called PlayerPod, Todd. And it's brilliant. It even does videos and everything now. So if people have uploaded videos to their YouTube feeds, iTunes feed, you can actually watch them in the app on your device. Woohoo! The guy knows what he's doing. Yeah, Todd's a player. He's a podcast junkie, and he's developed it to make it awesome. And it's awesome. Plus. Yeah,
it does work good. Like I said, I've used it myself. Yeah.
No ads, and it syncs. So if you're listening to something at work, and you go home, it syncs. You open your computer up and you just continue on. It's brilliant.
Awesome.
What do they call that? Cross-platform syncing or something, isn't it, Larry? Is that the big terminology?
I think so.
Why do I look so I'm close up? Is it my setup or something? I feel like that I'm zoomed in on my ugly noggin here.
No, you're about the same as, I guess it's a little closer than I am, but my camera's a little farther off. But
we're about to be famous, guys.
Oh,
why?
I am sharing us to Facebook.
There you go.
I was going to say, who's come on board? We're going to be famous.
Yeah, Erik.
It was hilarious. You weren't here yesterday, Larry. You missed out.
I know I bailed on you guys.
I got me an education. Seriously, Todd, I learned so much stuff yesterday. I had to go down and have a nap afterwards. It was I
have that effect on people.
But it was good. It was good. It was new, and it was fresh for me to hear and and help with my understanding your Americans a little bit better. You see, because we have a totally different mindset in Australia, and I'm starting to see differences, and it's good, learning, growing, understanding, embracing the change.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can rehash some of that information. I did name this COVID-19 in the church just to make sure that the video never ever gets monetized ever. So, and maybe gets taken down. Who knows? But one thing would be interesting. You said you got an education in regards to kind of how things are in America. I with the different kind of rules and stuff that have come down, they've basically been driven by the various states. Is that the same in Australia, or is it more kind of national, kind of shelter-at-home rules and so forth?
It's been similar. We've got the states trying their best. And I don't know if it's like in America, each state has their own opinion on how things should be done. And so you have one state doing this, one state doing that, schools open, schools closed. Australia starts to get confused, and we all just don't know what to do sometimes.
Yeah.
In this sort of situation. The thing that I picked up talking to Todd yesterday was how a lot of this stuff that goes on actually infringes on your constitutional rights as well, which is interesting.
Right.
Which isn't a big thing in Australia, It's like I said earlier yesterday to Todd, the biggest rebellion I think we had in Australia was 1909 with the rum rebellion, when there was, no rum. We're a pretty laid back nation, and if given the I'm just trying to think about this. I'm trying to be polite too, because we're live. If we're given the information that's correct, that we can, you go onto a news media site and they will have something different to the health from the government site, or there's all these conflicting. If we're given the right information to start with, we're going to do the right thing and not hurt other people and go behind closed doors. Whereas in America, like with the shutting downs of churches that Todd mentioned, in a lot of areas that it actually infringes on your constitutional rights as well, what they're doing.
Yeah.
So it gets really, really messy. That's why I needed a nap. I was educated, mate. And it was interesting. It really was. I'm sure Todd's wife had a nice quiet night last night, because he talked himself out. It was good, mate.
She went to bed before I even started our conversation last night, and she's headed that way now. So.
True. See, she gets some peace and quiet. She's grateful for us podcasters, I think.
Yeah.
I think many wives.
Anytime she can go to bed without having to watch me toss and turn and look at my phone for an hour and a half is a plus.
Right.
Ooh, looking at the phone, man, that's a forehead slap. That's dangerous.
Yeah, one thing, from my perspective, and Todd, I know you got a lot of thoughts on this. I think the primary concern, at least as a Christian, is the restrictions on church gatherings. So like for instance, our church, they're voluntarily not meeting, and there hasn't been these crackdowns if churches want to do these drive up services and so forth. But there is a point where if the government is actually stopping churches from gathering, that's a clear violation of the Bible. We're not supposed to forsake the gathering of the saints. So that would be something that I guess in my mind is probably the most concerning, or potentially concerning. It hasn't got to the point yet where it's gone on long enough and where there's been friction, at least between my church and the government, but it's definitely something that I see would be kind of the primary concern as a Christian.
I agree with that, and with and I don't want to say with a caveat, but I agree with it But I also think that there's something else that we have to keep in mind when it comes to the way the system's breaking down right now. And some of that is, gosh, this is why this conversation is never an easy one.
Right.
And it's not one that in the modern history of the United States that we've really had to have all that often. And there's a reality in which there have been, epidemics and pandemics and other states of emergency in the history of the United States, even from the time of the Spanish flu until now. But it hasn't been, I look back in history and the vast majority of people alive today cannot point to anything that we have experienced in the United States that comes as close to complete shutdown as what we're experiencing right now.
The only thing that comes close as far as just societal impact is 9/11, because how it affected travel and so forth. And that's even, obviously this is a lot more restrictive because it's pervasive, throughout society and not just air travel and so forth.
Right. Absolutely. And that was really, for lack of better terminology, was a blip, really.
Yeah.
It was a tragic moment. And when you look at the numbers of people that died in just one day there, and then the follow-on, the ancillary collateral damage that came about because of it, there's just nothing that you can compare this to. The thing that makes this so compelling and so interesting from the perspective of history and current events, and from a church view, is that there's so much more at play here than just our right to gather and worship as we see fit. And I say that with some hesitation because obviously for Orthodox Christians, and when I say Orthodox, you both know what I'm referring to and what I mean.
Yeah.
But for Orthodoxy, our worship is dictated by God. And so there are parameters that have to be in place for worship to really be genuine worship. And so the state can't ever really interfere with that. The state can't ever truly impinge on that, but they've tried throughout the history of the church, and they've tried throughout the history of many nations. This is the first time that we've ever seen in the history of the United States where a current event that is legitimate. I'm not a conspiracy theory wonk. I'm not into, and I don't even like using that term anymore because it really kind of downplays some legitimate questions about a lot of different things that take place in society, and kind of demeans the person who might share a countercultural view. But I'm not into, grabbing that little thread and pulling it until you get all the way back to, the Bilderberg and the Illuminati and all that stuff.
Right.
But here you have a legitimate event. It's clear there's something out there. It's making people sick. It's killing some. Not as many as I think we're being told, but it's definitely killing people, and there are people that are vulnerable. But there's an underlying factor. There's something underneath the surface that I think is being the COVID-19 issue, the illness itself, is being used as a virus, if you will, politically and socially and economically. It's being used as a virus to infect a system of life and a way of living that is seen as dangerous by a certain segment of people within the political spectrum in the United States. And as Saul Alinsky said in his book, Rule for Radicals, and I can't quote it directly from the book. I don't know if it's actually verbatim in the book, but it was something that he was known for saying, and it was really what Rules for Radicals was all about. It was never let a crisis go to waste.
Right.
Yep.
And I think that's what we're seeing here. I think we're seeing a crisis that could be managed differently, being managed the way that it is, specifically because there is a socio-political worldview that wants to take control. And one of the first things they're going to want to do is silence any dissent. And that's going to mean coming from the church. And what we see right now is a good portion of Christianity, I think, with a right heart and a right motivation, is saying we have to trust God and we have to trust the elected officials. Don't you know what Romans 13, 1-7 says? And I think therein lies the core problem for the church in the United States, and maybe even in other places around the world. But the core problem, especially for the United States, is that we have allowed what I believe to be a errant and quite frankly a very dangerous view of Romans 13, 1-7 to come into play. And we interpret it far differently than it's really been interpreted through the history of the United States, especially, but throughout the Western world. And that's not to say that I think that we shouldn't be living peaceful lives, keeping, the law, being respectable, being contributing members to our nation and contributing citizens of the society that we live in. But Romans 13, 1-7 in particular, addresses every nation state and every citizen of every nation state in the nation state and the situation that they live in. It doesn't automatically take us all the way back to Rome, living under a tyrant like Nero, and say, now you have to live like this.
Yep.
And for what happened in the history of the United States, the Constitution was intended to be the supreme earthly law. And elected officials serve at the leisure of the people and under the guidance and the rule of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And when they step outside of that, according to Romans 13, 1-7, they're the ones that are in violation of disobeying God. They're not obeying the ruling authority. And
well, that's what's unique about the United States because of the Constitution, because it is, basically the power is supposed to be in the hands of the people. So it is different than if you just had a ruling class that was actually, dictating, how the society is supposed to run, where you have basically the Constitution saying if the government gets out of line that you should be revolting, you should be defending your rights under the Constitution.
Absolutely. And I said last night when I was talking to Erik that, there are countries out there that are republics in ways, but the prime minister or the president or the premier or whatever the terminology is, can go and disband parliament. They can just go, no, we're starting over, all brand new elections right now. If you tried that in the United States, it would be a bloodbath, either a proverbial one or maybe a literal one. There would be, no, you can't do that. You don't have that power. Right. And as you said, it's a very distinct difference in the United States, over and above what we deal with in the rest of the world. And that has ramifications for the church. It has ramifications for our society. and it has ramifications for every individual Christian, and what it means to love neighbor like self. And ultimately, and I've said this in a lot of different ways and about a lot of different topics, what we see Paul do with Jesus' second great command to love neighbor like we love ourselves, and how Paul exegetes that in Philippians 2, 1 through 11, about looking out not just for our own interests, but for the interests of others. And you bring that to bear now in this situation and what it looks like in light of COVID-19 and what it looks like to see rights being, basically stripped away from people who aren't necessarily Christian. Then there are some who are maybe Christian in name only,
right?
Cultural Christian types. And then there are some that are just flat out not Christian, and they're being oppressed. And we're called to go to the aid of the oppressed people. And our Constitution delineates that as a God-given right, not a state-issued right that God said, okay, you can obey them on this one. It's a God-given right that the state cannot strip away from the people, because we are to be watching out for our neighbors and protecting them, even if they're not believers.
Yeah. And I could see, obviously, you mentioned if they were just to take the Constitution and rip it up, there would be a revolt. But obviously, if you can strip those rights away kind of slowly, people kind of get lulled into, not really noticing it. And then you have something like this, which they can actually take, kind of a large steps and limiting your rights. And because of the situation, it's allowed. And then I guess the danger is, of course, what does or doesn't get rolled back, once the quote unquote threat is gone, and how does that fundamentally change, how the country is run, moving forward?
Were you asking that in a rhetorical
Somewhat,
sense, or?
somewhat, yeah.
Well, you have to forgive me as I munch on my snack here while I'm using peanuts for energy. So,
Yeah, no problem.
Cheetos, or we'd be in trouble, wouldn't we?
what was that, Eric?
Lucky it's not Cheetos, mate.
Yeah, it'd be too many carbs in Cheetos. So, the question that we have to ask ourselves is, one, in the United States, who is our governing authority? Who's in charge? And I think, frankly, even though we fought a war, back in the 1700s to be free of the crown, to be free of royalty ruling over us, we have kind of anointed people that are elected and made them kind of our kings, made them, royalty. And that's backfiring on us now, because people don't have a proper view of who's in charge and who answers to who. And so what we do is we set up these people in positions of power, and then we kowtow to them. You go up there, you give us everything we want, and you protect us, and we'll keep putting you in this position of power. And they become drunk on that, and they end up failing us. And I don't want to say it's terrifying, but it's staggering to see not just the church. That's a completely different part of this conversation, but just see the American people respond with the idea that somehow the government can protect them from something the government didn't create.
Yeah.
And you look at what Cuomo said in New York, I think it was yesterday, as they talk about how they're flattening the curve. And he said, and I'm going to paraphrase, God didn't do this, we did this. And I'm like, dude, you You have no idea what you're bringing on yourself when you talk like that. And the American people, and sadly the majority of the church in the United States, really kind of go along and say, I'm so glad the government's protecting us. And when you look at the history of empires in the world, 200 to 250 years is about max. And the United States, we may call ourselves a republic, but when you look at how much territory the United States covers, and Erik and I talked about this last night, when you look at how much territory the United States covers just in the contiguous United States, and then you lump in the territories, then you lump in states like Hawaii, which is way off in the netherworld out there in the South Pacific, and places like Alaska, which are, separated from the rest of the country by, a whole other nation. We're an empire. We are an empire, and we might be on the cusp of collapse. Mm-hmm. And hearing Christians and political leaders say things like, especially Christians, well, you don't trust God. You just have to do what the leaders tell you to do. It's for your good. And then hear political leaders say, God didn't do this, we did this. I'm over here going, I don't know if I want to be there when the lightning strikes, bro.
Mm-hmm. Well, it leads to another question is, what can and should we do about it?
Well,
you talking church or politically?
I'm talking everything. As Americans, how should we be responding? Obviously, as Christians as well. But what can and should we be doing about it? Obviously, as far as our power over the government, it's really relegated to the voting box. We can leave voicemails for our representatives and so forth, and they may or may not listen to them, write letters. But, there's either, you vote people in and out of power, and then, you've got the right to, at least, you can attempt to assemble and protest that way. But, I guess the thought is, what is the right thing to be doing, especially if these things are concerning to you?
Well, first, from my perspective, the measures that churches are taking right now are perfectly fine.
Yeah.
I've yet to critique a single elder, a single congregation for making the decision to either meet from home via apps like this, or meet in their parking lot, or meet in very select small groups, Bible studies, in little neighborhoods, using precautions. I have not critiqued that in the least, and I won't, to a degree. Now, that being said, I do think that there is a time and a place where elders, sessions of Presbyterian churches, elder boards of other, churches, or pastor, senior pastors or lead pastors, or whatever the terminology might be. I think there's going to come a time where if this stretches out, they're going to have to say enough's enough. We are going to meet, because the United States is a free nation, and you don't have the power to restrict us. And so there's that balance. They're doing the right thing. They're following, good safety guidelines. I don't have an issue with that. But they're not being given the choice in a lot of places now. You look at Kentucky, you look at Michigan, you look at Nevada, you look at, I think, what's another one? Greenville, Mississippi, and Louisville, Kentucky. The mayor there tried, and he got shot down by a judge. So, but there are places that are trying, and to some degree, the church does have to stand up to that and say, no, you don't have that power. You don't have that authority. You can't tell us. And even if you do tell us, we're not going to listen. And you have to weigh it out. And in that disobedience to that elected official, who ultimately really does serve you, serves the people of the church, because we're citizens here. and we have a dual citizenship. We just have to be honest with ourselves. It sounds so sanctimonious and hyper spiritual to say, well, I'm not a citizen of this world. I'm just passing through. I'm a citizen of another kingdom. Jesus is my Lord. But he's made us citizens of the United States, or, in Erik's case, the land down under. But in particular here for American Christians, we are citizens of both God's kingdom and Jesus is our Lord, but we also are supposed to be citizens of the United States, which means responding to the laws of this country the way they should be responded to. And that might mean standing up and saying, no, you cannot tell us we can't meet. We'll take precautions. That's on us. Right. We're going to tell the vulnerable to not come. We're going to tell the immunocompromised, don't come. We will come to you as we can, because I'm pretty sure there are places in the Bible where it tells the elders to go and meet with those who can't make it, and even go to the sick and anoint them with oil. And I'm not a charismatic.
Yeah.
So, and it might take some civil disobedience. It might take some saying, no, we're not following your dictates anymore. And that's from the church perspective. Now, yesterday, Raleigh, North Carolina, citizens gathered outside of government building, and they were told they had to disband or be arrested because protesting wasn't an essential activity. And then 5 of them were arrested. And that's just flagrant. That's flagrant. Yep. That's disobeying the law of the land on the part of the law enforcement officers. They direct violation of their oath of office. They do not have to enforce that. Even if you want to say that a governor's decree is law, it's a direct violation of the supreme law of the land.
Right.
Because the First Amendment guarantees a right to peaceably assemble for the redress of grievances.
Yep.
And they go out and shut it down, saying the governor said this is not essential, so you can't do this. That's a very dangerous precedence.
Yeah.
And the church should be on the forefront of standing with those people and saying, no, we're not going to let you do this.
Yeah.
Because the Constitution is our law, not you.
Or, I mean, that's where I see things, I guess, coming to a head potentially the most quickly is how we kind of started this off with the restrictions or potential restrictions of churches eventually meeting back together. So I think, but then that goes hand in hand, obviously, with being able to assemble in general, given the constitutional rights and so forth. So they do go hand in hand.
Agreed. Absolutely. And that's where, if we're going to look out for our neighbors as Christians, that's going to mean reaching out and helping to protect the oppressed.
Yeah.
No matter who they are. If they're genuinely being oppressed and they haven't, done something in particular to violate God's law and to violate reasonable laws, meeting in your front yard with your family, so the governor of Michigan said, you can't even go visit a family member on Easter.
Yeah, that's crazy.
You can't, if you want to drive across town to go meet a family member and the governor of Michigan says you can't do that, and then you get pulled over or you are walking into the house and police show up and go, hey, you don't live here. And we followed you from your home address. You're under arrest for violating. Whether or not that person's a Christian, that should concern us, and we should be speaking out.
Yeah. And
that should be our first step, is the peaceable assembly and speaking out, using the platforms that we have. And going from there, when that's not working, then maybe we start organizing protests, because our ultimate goal is not violence. And that's been kind of the dichotomy that's being foisted on people from people inside the church, from people inside the church. And the two things that I hear so constantly, why does it matter? What does you speaking out have to do? What's it going to cost? Who's going to listen to you? You're just a nobody on Facebook. And it's true. Like, bro, I'm a nobody. I get, interaction with, anywhere from 50 to 100 people through the course of a week on my Facebook wall out of, all of my friends on Facebook.
Dude, you've got that cool name TC. We don't have that.
Well, that's true. Only
But
a few of us can have that. So,
you're up there, man.
so
Serious.
We all know
PC.
Eric's the most popular on this on here right now. He's got the biggest following
it's because
he's the most
of his-
entertaining.
I
It's
think
his,
there's people following me so they can sue me.
please, no, don't say that. I can't afford to be sued.
Yeah.
I'll be in debtor's prison.
Hey, you're all right. They only got debts. Yeah, they got debts from me.
But when you watch these things as they're happening, and the church says to you, well, why are you speaking out? No one listens to you. They would never say that to me about the gospel. A lot of these people would never say, why do you preach the gospel on the streets? Why do you go to college campuses and preach the gospel? Why do you go to small little town in southeast Minnesota on Saturday afternoons and Saturday mornings at a bike trail and preach? Because nobody is listening. I said, well, that's not the point.
Right.
The point is, what if somebody is listening? And this is a gospel issue in that everything is related to the gospel to some degree or another. The answer to every problem is, now, is the gospel going to liberate the United States from a tyrannical takeover? Could, but it doesn't necessarily have to.
Right.
Yep.
But to some degree, everything is kind of a gospel issue. But even if you remove that from the equation, who cares how many people are listening? That's not the point. The point is, speak out. You should be speaking out. When you're seeing injustice done, you should be speaking out. And this is coming from a guy that is about as adamantly opposed to the social justice movement as one can be,
Right.
because I see a lot of flaws in the social justice movement that aren't really about oppression. It's all about perceived injustice that's manufactured. And I'm talking about real injustice as it's defined by the law of the land. And so, I'm going to speak out no matter who's listening, because you don't know who is listening. You don't know who's going to say, you know what, you're right. It's time for us to say something. The other one that I hear a lot is, well, if this is so serious to you, start a revolution. That's not the point. I'm not trying to start a revolution. I'm trying to avoid that.
Yep.
I really am. And that's the whole point of the Constitution, is to avoid the revolution that was so common. I mean, if you look around during that time frame, in the United States was just beginning, the 13 original states, as they're ratifying the Constitution or working on the Bill of Rights, there were things happening all over the world. Leaders were being deposed, people were being killed for being of the wrong political affiliation, and they were trying to avoid that ever happening in the United States by giving the people of the United States the supreme law that allows them to redress of these situations before it ever came to picking up arms and going to war. And that's exactly what my point is. And I was thinking about this today, and there's nuance in it, and I know you guys are quick enough, you'll pick it up. But here it is. I will never, ever pick up arms and go to war with my country. Ever.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you what, I will pick up arms to defend my country.
Yep.
So that's kind of, where I'm at, where I'm thinking about these things, without getting into, dude, we could really dig into Romans 13, 1-7 and focus on why the Constitution is a ruling authority, and how we're seeing that the elected officials right now are not doing justice. They're not doing righteousness. They're not being ministers of God's justice in a lot of ways. So what are your thoughts on all of this, Larry?
Well, part of it, I think about, my personal experience and what, I am or am not experiencing, locally. And some of that is kind of selfish in that, well, I can pretty much go where I want to. The cops aren't following me around. North Dakota is pretty conservative and has been kind of late to the game, I guess I would say. They've been kind of the last to implement, some of the rules and regulations that have kind of spread throughout the various states and so forth. We don't officially have a shelter at home, rule right now, but there are guidelines that have been put out there, and people have pretty much just been, trying to do things reasonable and prudent, and trying to go by those guidelines. So I see. I can go over to family's house, or I can go over to a friend's house, or I can go to the store and walk in and buy what I want. They're not saying you can't buy these items because they're not essential. I can grab anything off the shelf. So there's some aspect of, well, some of this is not affecting me, and so there's that kind of selfish aspect. Then if it's not affecting you in a dramatic way, a lot of times you have, you kind of just don't think about it. But then you see the kind of radical, absurd examples that you see on Facebook or in the news and so forth, where people are getting tickets for $500 tickets for a meeting in a parking lot service, or like as you mentioned, being able to potentially being arrested for assembling and so forth. And you want to stand up against that, but at the same time it's really not affecting you, so a lot of times that kind of goes to the back burner and kind of out of sight, out of mind.
Right, and I think that's a pretty common. And it's not just you, and I know that you're speaking somewhat experientially and somewhat observationally.
Right.
But I think that's a pretty common view of a lot of people, Christian or not. As long as it's not affecting me, what does it really matter? And I think that's part of the problem, in that it's a very typical, instead of atypical, it's actually a very typical response of the human condition.
Right.
It's not affecting me, so what does it matter? Problem with that is that always backfires on us historically. You cannot point to a single situation where everybody's like, I'm really glad I sat this one out.
Yep.
And I shouldn't be laughing, because honestly, this is it's really a hard topic. It's hard. It's heavy. It weighs on me. My wife, bless her heart, she got up. We have had just this beautiful. My daughter got married in June. Her husband is an upstanding young man. We would love for them to be serving Christ, but they're upstanding, moral citizens. They had their baby girl on Thursday of last week. And so I'm an old man. And so we've got this beauty of grandparenthood happening. We've got a responsible son living in our home who still at the age of 18 is not afraid to give us a hug and a kiss and tell us he loves us.
Yeah.
So we have all this beauty in our home. And my wife said to me yesterday, she goes, all of this COVID-19 stuff, I'm just so down.
Yeah.
And that to me was a reminder of just how serious this situation is, and why it's important for Christians more than anybody else to be speaking out and reaching out to their neighbors and saying, hey, just so you know, I care, we care, and we're going to watch out for you.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Not just because the Constitution says so, but because the scriptures tell us to. And it's so hard for people to understand. They don't get it, because I don't think they understand the perspective, because they pit passages like Romans 13 against other passages, and they use them to trump one another, and they'll use them as clubs to beat one another over the head.
Yeah.
And
Well, and people also are, it's kind of an all or nothing type deal as well. So if you question the the laws, rules, or mandates that have gone into place, then you want people to die. So it's kind of this all or nothing mentality. Well, if you're not going along with what the government is saying, then somehow you are not loving to your neighbor and are wanting this to spread and to continue farther than it should.
Right. And that's, to me, that if you want to see me get angry, tell me that I'm taking this position because I don't love my neighbor.
Right.
And I don't care if they die. And Larry, you've known me through Facebook for a while.
Yep.
It's going to come as no surprise to you. I can be opinionated.
That is true.
So matter of fact, yes, Todd, you are certainly opinionated, but I love my neighbor. I do. I really do love my neighbor. And like I said, I don't like to pat myself on the back, but here I am as a guy who will stand in December in Southeast Minnesota in his front yard and preach the gospel to neighbor families and people from around our town as they're sledding down the hill in front of my house on an organized city winter festival day.
Right.
And when I saw our governors, if you're a student of politics and a student of of worldviews, you watch society. You don't have to be plugged into the 24-hour news cycle. You can just watch society. You can just watch as things are playing out and know certain things are coming. And so I said to my wife before all of this happened, I said, hey, I'm gonna type up this letter. I'm gonna print out about 80 of them, and I'm gonna walk around our community, our little subsection of the town that we live in, and I'm gonna just put these flyers indoors of people around our town and saying, hey, I have an essential position, which means that even with a shutdown, with a shelter in place being put in place, I'm going to be traveling back and forth from Rochester on a regular basis. If there's anything that I can do, if you find yourself ill, if you find yourself unable to travel or not, don't feel comfortable traveling, please reach out to me.
Right.
And please don't hear me telling you this or sharing this with your audience as, oh, look at how selfless he is and how wonderful he is, because that's not why I'm telling you that. I say that.
You don't need to apologize to our audience, mate. They know you're not a stiff.
Eric's back.
I had crows hassling out my chickens. They just hatched this morning, and so had to have a bit of
so I say those things because you want to make me mad. Tell me that I don't care about people dying.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why I do those things, because I care about my neighbor. And you're over here screaming and hollering about how we need to be sheltered in place for longer because people aren't listening. And I'm watching Christians rejoice over churches, even if I don't agree with their theology, about pastors being arrested and churches being shut down, and then applauding, going, they should have listened to the authorities. They should have listened to the rulers. Yeah. And you tell me that I don't care? Yeah, you want to make me mad? Tell me that one more time. Say it, Yeah. Look me right in the face and say it. And let me show you. Because I guarantee you, I'm probably doing more for neighbors. Eric's turning away.
Aaron, he's getting feisty.
I'm probably, and that's maybe a little bit of pride coming out, but I'm probably doing more for my neighbor than you are sitting at home being worried about whether or not you're going to contract COVID-19. And let's be honest, the vast majority of people that are sitting at home because of COVID-19 are not doing it to protect other people. They're doing it because they're terrified they're going to get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the main reasons we isolated here was because my missus was more susceptible to breathing problems So just for her sake, it's like, well, I cut myself off from the rest of the world. I don't care anyway. You know, I can still holler at them over a fence. You know, I still got a boombox on me. But you know, it's a hard one. It's in Australia, I don't think our figures are collective enough. It's like China, you know, I think this week we hit over 2 million worldwide, and it took 2 weeks for us to get to 2 million, whereas it took us over a month to get to 1 million. It's still escalating. And so, you know, people that need to lock up, that are crook, like people in nursing homes and that, we need to look after these people. But, you know, you're an essential service. I say hello to me postie every morning, you know, as he goes past. How you doing, bro? You know, it's he's still out there, you know.
Right.
He's still sorting mail, and, you know, they go on about how it's it can be, what is it, can stay on plastic for 3 to 5 days or something, and on cardboard for 3 days. What about all these guys in the mail centres sorting mail and going through parcels? Are they wearing hazmat suits in there or something?
Well,
you know, and it's a bizarre one, isn't it?
well, and Erik, you bring up a really good point, and I wish people would talk about this more, because I see there's a couple of things happening with this essential versus not essential. One, why would we try? I don't care what government you live with. I don't care what your political structure is in your country. Why would you ever want anybody in government telling you who's essential and who's not?
Right.
That's just terrifying. Two, there's I would say this very carefully.
You did this yesterday, eh? I'm just turning me fan on. I'm in a hot flush. We're not, those of us that are essential, we're really not essential. What we're being told by the government is you're expendable. That's nice, wouldn't it?
That's you're expendable, bro. You know, so go do your job. Grocery store clerk. We don't care if you die. You're a grocery store clerk. Nurse, we can replace you. Yes. We don't care if you die. Oh, and by the way, your family's expendable too.
Right. And
so we use these terms like essential, and then we put up signs all over the place. Thank you to our essential heroes. We're making heroes out of everybody. And if anybody's a student of men like George Orwell, or has ever read, you know, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, this is newspeak. You know, we're using terminology to paint people in this light that makes them the patriots, and not patriots the way the United States tends to use it, but patriots in the way the progressive communist Marxists use it. And so we're now making heroes out of people who are, and don't get me wrong, I'm so thankful the grocery stores in my neck of the woods are open. I'm thankful that the home improvement stores are open.
Right.
But they're not heroes. Yeah. I'm not a hero. I have a job to do, and it needs to get done. And if all of us decide to stay home, things are going to fall apart. And that's the thing for the United States right now. And people might think I'm overreacting, but we're like hanging on by the tips of our fingers, and our fingernails are pulling out of the nail beds right now. Yeah. And if that continues, those fingernails are finally going to rip all the way out. Our fingers are going to give out, and the entire economy is going to come crashing. And there won't be any heroes left, because we're all going to be fighting in the streets over bread and toilet paper.
Yeah.
$10 eh?
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, the other aspect is, you know, how many small businesses and so forth are just never going to recover from this. You know, they're never coming back. You know, they are out of business. You know, they're not providing quote unquote essential services, so they're, you know, doing nothing, and people are losing their way of life and losing their source of income. Right.
And that's what I want people to, you know, see, is that, one, every job is essential to every single person who's working.
Yep.
Every job. And now I've got somebody just stepping in who says, and Ronald Reagan was famous. The most terrifying words you can ever hear from somebody is, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help."
Yep.
And that's really what they're saying. It's like, we're from the government and we're here to tell you we're going to help. And I don't know if you guys saw it, Larry. I posted a couple of weeks ago. I posted, what are your constitutional rights worth to you? Oh, about $1,200.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at. They've bought us off, and they've bought us off for a pittance of a payment. We hear the number $3 trillion and we just like, man, that's a lot of money. But every adult who's filed a tax return in 2018 or 2019, because if you hadn't gotten around to doing your 2019, you're still going to get one because you filed taxes in 2018.
Yep.
Every adult who makes less than a certain amount of money, mind you, let's just think about that for a minute. We've now determined that taxpayers, it doesn't matter, as long as they make less than a certain amount, you're valuable enough to get this stimulus check. But if you make over that,
right,
you don't get this money.
Yep.
But, frankly, the guy who makes $100,000 a year or more might be in just as tight of a position as I am.
Yep.
And so we've sold out our liberties. We've sold out our freedom. We've sold out our Constitution. We've betrayed the supreme law of our land for a mere $1,200 per adult and $500 per dependent child, and destroyed the backbone of the American way of life, which is the small business owner, who literally oftentimes pays himself last.
Yeah.
After he pays his employees. Right. And we're looking at that person saying, your business isn't essential. So, excuse the terminology, screw you.
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, like you said, your job is essential to you because it's what provides, you with food, shelter, etc. So the whole concept of jobs being not essential is kind of asinine.
Oh, absolutely. And
it's a funny word. Sorry.
That's a what?
A funny word. Asinine. Sorry.
Well,
Every time
it's just our way of saying what we want to say without saying it in a way that's going to get us kicked out of church.
Exactly.
You'll have to teach me offline what that is, Harry.
Just pretty much means ridiculous, basically.
Okay.
Maybe a little harder edge to it than that, but
that's
if somebody's playing asinine characteristics, he's actually just a dickhead.
Yeah, it's ridiculous and stupid, I guess you could say.
Yes, there you leave it to Erik to simplify it for us.
Yes.
Or as they know in the King's English, it's Richard Cranium.
Yes.
There you go.
Yep. I like that word. I like to use that more often. Asinine.
I would say that this is a distinctly American situation right now, in that it's not that other countries aren't facing a lot of the same problems. There's a compounded danger in the United States right now, because a lot of people in the United States would never dream of giving up the lifestyle that they live. And they would say, to some degree, I want to be taken care of. And what they're really saying is they want to avoid being responsible for themselves.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what's actually happening in these situations is a dismissal of, because of the way we live, the freedoms that we live, we've gone from being a nation of liberty to a nation of libertinism. And I'm not talking about the political aspirations, of the libertarians, but this libertine idea of I can do whatever I want, and damn the consequences, because there really shouldn't be, because gosh darn it, I'm free. And as the saying goes back all the way to the inception of the nation, and it's probably been around for even longer than that, that with great freedom comes great responsibility. And so what the United States has become is not a nation of freedom and responsibility. It has become a nation of libertinism and escapism.
Yeah.
I should be able to do whatever I want to do, make as much of a mess as I want of my life and the life of everyone around me.
Yep.
And somebody else should come and then clean that up for me. And
here's a funny analogy for you, mate. I've been watching Parks and Recreation.
So sorry.
So I've been getting a Ron Swanson education on the government system, but I'm seeing what you're saying with one of the characters, Tom, the young kid. He does what he wants whenever he wants, and it always affects and hurts other people, and they're always cleaning up his mess. And he has no idea what he's doing. But yeah, I'm a big Ron Swanson fan. Sorry about that.
I've only seen about a half of an episode, so you're already ahead of me.
Oh, my son put me onto it. He said to me, I saw this, Dad, and you remind me so much of Ron Swanson. And I didn't know whether it was an insult or a compliment.
I've seen some clips. He's pretty funny character.
But he constantly digs at the way that society's trying to chip away at your constitutional rights.
Right.
Even though some of his are extreme, like he says, I have the right to be like this. That's my right as an American. And I can see that. I understand that. Funny show. Sorry about that, guys.
No, you're fine. This is your show. I'm a guest. So either I have to do everything you say, or I should be given free reign. I'm not sure which.
10% in the coffers, mate. That's it. Just drop your 10% in the coffers as you leave.
You must go to Brian Houston's church.
Oh, we don't mind. What is it? Leave your money in the offering. We don't mind if it rattles, but we prefer if it folds. Thank you very much. Have a nice weekend.
Yeah. So
it's a hard thing for you guys. It is. I'm watching it, and I think you guys, it's waking up the church as well as the nation, and then those in the church that are nation people. It's mixed all in with you guys. Like out here in Australia, everybody goes, let's shut down the church, and everybody goes, yay. If they shut down all the 11 churches in my valley, I'm like, woohoo, cheers. I'll buy a bottle of champagne for everybody. Because they don't preach the gospel. That's the sad thing, they don't preach the gospel. Australians are different. I don't know if there was any really big reaction. I haven't seen anything negative about it. Most of the guys here were in damage control and were already trying to work out how best to get online and keep the money coming in. That seemed to be the most sort of application here. The churches were considered, I think, non-essential. ScoMo made that call. Now he's a Pentecostal from a ACC church in Sutherland. So, and also he was mentored by Brian. So he was looking at it possibly too from a church perspective when he did the call. He thought it obviously was safer to do it. I don't think anybody hasn't complied. I haven't seen too much information. Nobody sent me anything yet because it'd be interesting to see. But yeah, Australians, like I said yesterday with you, Todd, we're totally different in the way that we approach everything because of the parliamentary system that we have out here in Australia. We have to fall back on the law and go through due process to see things, whereas you guys have a right straight up front. When your feet are on that dirt over there in America and you are an American citizen, that Constitution is your plumb line, and You know, it's interesting how it goes into the church too. It has to affect all areas of life. Like you said, Paul talked about that often. We talked about that quite a lot yesterday through Philippians, Romans, and other areas where the law affected even early Christians. And then Paul responded in some cases, and in some cases he didn't, you know, because he knew how to approach it. Yeah, I feel sorry for you guys, you know, because you've got a lot of people as well that just simply want the churches closed down because they want them shut down because they don't like churches. And so you've got all them behind it. And in amongst it all, you may have a handful of people that actually out of concern are going, well, is it a good idea? And everyone goes, yeah, just shut them down anyway. You know, we don't want them open. These religious institutions, what do? All they do is steal people. They're full of pedophiles. You know, that's the perception that most people have of churches. And we saw Rodney Howard-Browne. It wasn't a real issue until he started to, what do you call it? He was flaunting it. He was making light of the actual concept that he was going to stay open regardless of the laws because God's going to protect me. And actually, so,
let me push back on that a little bit, brother.
Yep. Take me back through it again.
Profound respect for guys like Chris Roseborough, obviously. I love what he does.
I don't think Chris has dealt with this one yet, so I haven't had any input from him.
No, I'm just saying that, you know, Chris is very good at pointing out guys like Rodney Howard-Browne, and we should be. We should be very adamant about staying away from him. And like I said last night as we were having our preemptive conversation, the biggest concern that I have is that the world, and I'm not using it in the global respect, I'm using it in the, you know, secular versus Christian or whatever. The world doesn't look at different churches and recognize a difference between different doctrinal and theological positions. So they see a Roman Catholic and they say, oh, well, that, you know, they're a little different from a Lutheran and a little bit more different from Baptist and maybe somewhat different from Presbyterians and Episcopalians and Anglicans, but they're all Christians. And so they don't, you know, so there is a, like you were saying, well, this church defends pedophiles, or this church is full of, you know, baby touchers, and this church is all about money. So therefore, it's the logical fallacy that this applies to all churches. And so the thing with Rodney Howard-Browne is that we as Christians, whether we like his theology or we believe him to be a heretic or a charlatan, we have a responsibility to stand up when the time is right, which should be frequent and often, and say very loudly, Rodney Howard-Browne is not a representative of true Orthodox Christianity. That being said, Rodney Howard-Browne is being targeted for being a Christian. And contrary to how this has been painted by the church, or excuse me, not by the church, but by the media and the world, Rodney Howard-Browne's church, where they came up with the money, we can only guess, spent $100,000 on a hospital-grade ventilation system, air purifying system, to scrub the air in that church building. I was
muted then. That was a waste of money because you can't purify the air. You can't remove a virus. That was a smoke screen.
I'm gonna do the 1 Corinthians 13 thing, and I'm gonna say, is it an ill-advised move? Absolutely. Am I going to assume he was just doing it as a smokescreen to make it look good? No. I think he thought spending $100,000 on a hospital-grade air purifiers, air scrubbing system was a good idea because they wanted to be able to meet. And they were going to do what they could to make that happen and make it safe. And then they cordoned off sections for families. So if you came as a family group, you stayed in your family group and you were at least 6 feet apart from other family groups. And then
But
they
that's
also
stupid. That's what I don't get. You can stand within 20, 30 feet of an infected person and still become infected. That's the thing that I don't understand here. We got rolled about it yesterday. It's more important to love your neighbour than your stupid rights to open and have a church meeting, because you're killing people all because of your right to meet. Now, that is where I had an issue with it yesterday, remember? Because
right, and I'm not.
if he had the wisdom and the smarts to put in an air purifier, he would have known straight up and would have been told that it's not going to do nothing. If you really want to isolate these people, you've got to stand 30, 40 feet apart.
Well, but brother, you got to remember, and I don't know what the information's been like over in Australia, but we've been getting so many mixed signals over here about what's safe and what's not safe.
Right.
We've been told all along at least 6 feet that 6 feet is going to provide the buffer. And
it's really sad, because I've been watching it. My wife worked over 20 years in hospital. Same, me too. The precautions they're telling you to take now, they're standard, everyday, normal living precautions, for goodness sakes. They're not going to protect you from a virus. A surgical mask will last 5 to 10 minutes. That's it, unless you're wearing a N.95 micron mask that has a filter in it. You've got 5 to 10 minutes of protection, and you're breathing in and out a virus if you are or not aren't infected. These are the things that are really starting to annoy me. I'm seeing around the local area profiteering, right? This is what I'm just going to get this one out there. They're getting T-shirts and making masks out of them and selling them for $10, and people are presuming that they're going to help them. You might as well stick a nappy over your face. It'd be better. So the information's out there, and this is what's really sad. You should be able to rely in a situation like this on a sounds terrible, a government-run health organisation that has the truth and statistics that you can look at, not just some media's inception of those poor people that died in America for taking, is it chloroxyquine, whatever it is, that malaria drug, because they heard that it was being tested as a possible cure.
But see,
they
that's
OD'd on the shit and died.
But that's exactly the problem with misinformation. The people who OD'd on the drug didn't OD on the drug. They OD'd on an aquarium cleaner that looked the same.
Didn't it have the same compound?
No, not even close to the same. Not even close to the same.
Yep.
But they
sad. See, to start with, why would they even look? They go, I'm just.
Well, I think the wife tried. I think the wife did that to kill the husband, but that's a whole nother topic.
She cleaned his aquarium for him.
Yeah.
I think there was another one in Australia. They've said that ivermectin might possibly be the cure for it. Right now, ivermectin's used in pig farming and chook farming to kill internal parasites. It's also used in humans. It's been used in the drug industry for about 2 years to cut cocaine and crack with. It's a common thing, but when are people going to, I'm waiting for people to start drinking the crap thinking that, I've got COVID. Is this going to help? There's so many things that are out there where it's.
But this let's use the chloroquine, and then I want to get back to Rodney Howard Brown.
Yep.
The chloroquine works. It works. Absolutely works. Chloroquine works. There are doctors that are using it. They're not losing patients.
Yeah.
From the chloroquine.
Why hasn't it gone worldwide?
It's not a it doesn't rid you of the virus, but it's good from a treatment standpoint. So it helps mitigate. Mitigate the symptoms.
It aids the insertion of zinc into your system.
Right.
Yep.
Zinc is for some reason, zinc in particular, and I'm not a virologist and I'm not a microbiologist and I'm not a doctor and I play one on TV, but for some reason zinc seems to be the thing with this COVID-19, and the chloroquine, along with the what we call Z-Packs here,
yep.
are absolutely devastating to the COVID-19. But, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier, there's something political going on under the surface.
Oh, absolutely.
And they're trying to discredit our current president. And anybody who follows me knows that I was not a fan in the last presidential election, like to the point where I lost friends over it. Yep. But they're trying to discredit him. And so when this couple went out and took this aquarium cleaner and ingested it,
yep,
even though the facts were there that it wasn't the same thing, and it was clear that it wasn't the same thing, the media in the United States ran with it because it fit their agenda.
Yep.
And you have governors.
A lot of stories lately over there.
And you have governors like in the state of Nevada, and I think, was it Michigan as well? Don't quote me on that. But there's been at least 2 governors that have said they'll take the medical license from any doctor who does use it. Even though other doctors from all over the country are telling people it works, please use it.
Yeah.
And so what I want to do, I want to get back on the Rodney Howard Brown thing, because if you let me, I'll go down any rabbit trail.
That's our specialty.
I know. So what I want to do is, brother, I say this not to be in your face about it. What you have to understand is that with the size of the United States and the amount of misinformation that's out there, and I wouldn't even necessarily say a lot of it's been intentionally, maliciously propagated, but there's just so much misinformation out there coming from so many different so-called professionals in the field, some experts in the field. I mean, the WHO says one thing, and then the CDC says another, and then we've got a model from this, from the Imperial College, and a model from that college, and a model from another one, and they're all saying different things about what works and what doesn't work. You've got countries like Sweden that aren't social distancing; they're doing herd immunity, and for the Swedes to do herd immunity, you have to forcibly point guns at them to make them get together, because Swedes don't like to hang out with each other. And
I think legally they couldn't isolate over there because Sweden doesn't have the run of its own country.
Well, I'm saying that,
you know what I mean? That's why
Sweden,
I get really up. It's a poor example because Sweden is a shithole, honestly. They have about 75 no-go-zone cities at the moment that are Islamic run that even their own police won't approach. You know, there's lots of things about Sweden they won't tell you about.
No arguments. No arguments. But Sweden's not the only country that's doing this. There are others. And all of that aside, there's just a ton of misinformation out there. Some of it, I think, calculated. We have the president's advisor on this right now, Fauci, telling us we'll never be able to shake hands again in the United States. What? And so there's just so much about what's being said that at some point you have to do what you think is best. And that's whether I like Rodney Howard Brown or not. I absolutely cannot stand his theology. I can't stand what he does to people. I believe that they did everything that they thought they could do and do it right based on the information that they had. Not to mention the fact that there was no order from the governor shutting down churches. At that point. This was a calculated move by the sheriff of Hillsborough County, Florida, to for some reason or another target a church. And it could have been a Reformed Baptist church. It could have been a conservative Lutheran or conservative Presbyterian church. It wouldn't have mattered. He wanted
laws by then, because I think you'll find most of those churches if they had had social distancing laws, would have already done it. I just personally don't like Rodney Howard-Brown, and I think he did it purely for the money. You know,
Well,
I don't know why they picked on Rodney Howard-Brown, but he's a really good target. You know,
well,
I
and
don't
I
mind
said,
mocking him and seeing what an ass he is. I think it's
I said
fantastic.
that. I said after the fact that it happened, I said, I'm in a strange place. One, I'm going to defend Rodney Howard-Brown. Two, I wish we could do something about him legally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really do, you know, but
It's a hard one because
he's a false prophet. I'd love to take him out and stone him, you know.
Let's look at another fella that you have at the moment in your country. North Carolina is his headquarters at the moment, right? His name's Torben Søndergaard. Now, he did a runner from Denmark to America under false pretenses of religious persecution over there. Basically, he was abusing kids with his deliverance sessions. It's demonic, right? It's been proven that he is still holding meetings, though there are lockdown laws, and there are known people that were infected in his community, but they still met publicly and also still went out publicly praying for people, knocking on doors and evangelizing. Now, how would you deal with a guy like that? He knows that there's infections in his own community, and he knows that they could be spreading it to other people that are at risk. Willingly, how do you deal with somebody like that? That's no different to your mate back then. What was his name in Jonestown?
Well, Jim Jones.
Yeah.
Jim, right. But Jim, let's, you know, I don't know this other guy you're talking about in North Carolina. But just using the Jim Jones as and I say this respectfully in deference to your age and wisdom, mostly your age.
I'm not that old.
That was just too easy. The Jim Jones situation was obviously he was a cultist, you know,
Yep.
clearly a cultist. Big difference between poisoning your own people, knowing you were going to kill them, and in this other situation, in that we have a history in the church,
Yep.
of being the ones who go into hot zones at great personal risk. Luther counseled his own people, you know, during plagues, be the ones who go. Be the ones who go.
Get ready to die.
Be ready to die for the sick. Even if it means you get, you know, if you get sick and die of the same thing, you got to be ready to go. You look at the days of the early church when lepers were still the outcasts of society, and what happened? The Christians went into the leper colonies and ministered to people who could kill them.
Right.
Yep.
And you know, you see that over and over and over again. And now, yes, and here's the Old Testament had laws in place for dealing with people who were contagious, who were sick. You know,
Yes.
there were quarantines in the Old Testament, but they were always of the ill, always for the ill. The ill were quarantined.
Yep.
Until they were cured. And that's what I think we need to get back to understanding, is that there's a fine line between going one way or the other, where I'm going to shelter in place and I'm not going to help anybody, or I'm just going to be just as nonchalant. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. You know, and like the MMA fighter who has the tattooed on his arm is just going into the ring to beat people up.
Is they go in with that mentality that, you know, the blood of Jesus covers me, we'll be fine.
Right.
And that is just, oh man, you just want to live.
No, and brother, I'm with you on that. I'm absolutely with you. I agree.
How
I think
deal with somebody like that in regards to, you know, like, let's say, for instance, just exchanged Rodney Howard-Browne for this other fella who was holding meetings, complying with all the social distancing rules, except for the fact that he knows that there are contaminated people in that church who will infect other people, but continues anyway because he believes God's looking after him. How would that work in America?
Well, first, with the American legal system, if it can be proven that he knew and he didn't, and he maliciously sent people out to infect other people, that's a completely different
that's a crime
scenario. That's criminal. That's absolutely criminal.
That's where you draw the line at malicious.
Well,
if you hide that information knowingly they're going to interact, I think there's a case to be made that that's malicious.
So
absolutely.
At least,
they kept it
malicious
hidden
by omission.
They kept it hidden because they believed God was protecting them and it was okay, and they went out and do it. That is still malicious, is it?
Well, Eric, you have to look at it too. That in the United States, we have, and this is where I think your analogy actually would make more sense. And there again, I don't mean that to be condescending, but in the United States, HIV positive and full-blown AIDS positive or AIDS symptomatic patients are not required to disclose their condition to their sexual partners.
I've read about the new laws in California too, where they can actually willfully infect other people, and there's
nothing they can do about it.
Yeah.
So the way the laws in the United States work, and this is the thing that's not, if I think if you're willfully infecting people and you're willfully infecting people, and there's a difference between knowing you have something but not believing you're going to pass it on versus knowing you have it and intentionally going out and coughing on people and sneezing on people and saying, no, you're not going to get sick because my God says you're not going to. And so here's an example I want you to take a look at with me just in the discussion. What about, and I have a friend who was just warned for criminal trespass. He is a street preacher. He is a phenomenal apologist. And it was yesterday, was issued a warning for criminal trespass for being on public property at an abortion mill in New Mexico. Mm-hmm. And the day before that, they used the governor's shelter-in-place orders to try and run him off and say he couldn't be there because it wasn't essential activity. There was the Benham brothers, who had a show, I think it was on HGTV several years ago, and lost it because of their stance on homosexual marriage. One of them, several of the people from the Benham family in North Carolina were arrested for being at an abortion mill that was supposed to be shut down, but was crowded, stuffed to the rafters, full of people seeking abortion. And they were outside practicing social distancing while they were preaching the gospel to people. Now there, I would say, let's talk about that. Are they wrong for doing that?
I would say, what the hell is the abortion mill doing open to start with?
Well, exactly. But And so I think there's a better comparison or dichotomy to look at between in that situation than this individual church in North Carolina who believes that the blood of Jesus has protected them and made them clean, and therefore they can't. We could have a conversation about motivation and intent for quite a while, but at the same time, I think there again, with precedents being set, does the government get to tell me that my free exercise of religion cannot be, and there again, I know this is a distinctly American thing.
Yeah.
And that's why I love you, because I know you're wrestling with this, because you're over here going, dude, but I don't care about your freaking rights. And that's been the argument from a lot of people. You know, I lost a beloved brother. I mean, he's still my brother, but our friendship is basically severed because he was tired of hearing me talk about this stuff.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Then shut up and talk about it. Have a drink with him.
And here's the deal: is that the way it was portrayed is you talk more about the Constitution than you do about the Bible, and so you love the Constitution more than you love God.
That's sad.
And I can be empathetic. I hate that word, empathy. I can be understanding and sympathetic to why you would feel that way when everything in your nature says that Romans 13, 1-7 says, and you guys all right if I bring it up?
Yep. You got it ready too. Anytime you interview Todd Pearson, folks, have Romans 13 ready.
Well, in this situation, yes.
Yeah.
Did you like my joke I made yesterday, Larry?
I like your what?
My joke I made yesterday. I told Todd to tell his wife we were looking for a Presbyterian, but he'd have to do. It's all we could find.
Oh, yeah.
He's the most
you want to confuse the most Presbyterian what?
The most unlike Presbyterian I've ever met.
That's the Reformed Baptists don't want me in the. No, I'm good with that. So, what most people do with Romans 13, 1-7 is they read 1-2, and it's every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. And they stop there. Mm-hmm. Because to them, that's all Romans 13, 1-7 really says. In fact, they just go, Romans 13. I'm like, I've literally had people tell me that. Romans 13. I'm like, okay, what part of Romans 13? Right. And what's the context of Romans 13? Romans 13, 1-2, Romans 13, 1-7, or Romans 13, 1-20? You know, what's your context? And what are we talking about here? And you can't just stop at 2 because... And you guys know the trite saying, whenever you see a therefore, you have to ask yourself, what's therefore, therefore? Right? So we read those, we read verse 1 and we read verse 2. It starts off with therefore. Well, Paul's not done with the therefores because he goes into verse 3 and he says, for. So all of that other stuff, for. Rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. Yep. Now, could stop. We could go all the way through, but Paul then goes on and gives this dissertation that the ruling authorities are supposed to reward good behavior and punish the evildoer. And in the United States, and as I'm going to sound like a broken record, but Romans 13 is very clear that in the United States, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. The people who penned the Constitution intended for it to be the supreme law of the land. And when you look at the Constitution through Romans 13, 1-7, and you think about the American motif of politics and civic duty, every single person in the country is in subjugation to Romans or to the Constitution according to Romans 13, 1-7. And when somebody does something that's in violation of that, they're not obeying God, and they're not rewarding the good doer or the doers of good works, and they're not punishing the doers of evil works. And that is where we're at in the United States, that a Christian can go out, and whether or not we agree with their theology, as long as what they're doing it with this intent of, and we have to remember how the world looks at Christians. They lump us all together into one basket, and I might hate the way they make me look, but I can't explain in a situation like this why Rodney Howard Brown's not a Christian and this other guy from North Carolina is not a Christian. Just like the lefties in America would say that my friend Ryan Denton down in New Mexico or the Denham brothers don't represent them, because they would never call a woman going into an abortion clinic. They would never call on her to not murder her baby, because that's not loving. Mm-hmm. So what we have to do is we have to embrace the Christian culture. And when we see people doing things that they are intending for good, whether it's wise or not, at least they're putting the effort in. And they shouldn't be getting punished for that. Yeah. And that's what's happening. So you look at Greenville, Mississippi. Here's a church, Temple Bible Church, our Temple Baptist Bible Church in Greenville, Mississippi on Wednesday night of last week. Because they have an elderly crowd, most of them don't know how to, and I think we talked about this last night, Eric. Most of them don't know how to use smartphones. Most of them don't even have a smartphone. So the pastor says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get this little FM transmitter broadcast up to a block or 2 blocks away. I'll tell you the frequency. Everybody pulls into the church parking lot. Nobody get out of their car. You leave your windows up. I'll be inside the building. I'll be preaching the Wednesday night service. You can listen.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Good idea.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all, other than it wasn't obeying the shelter-in-place order from the governor. Right. And the police show up and ticket every one of those people. And Larry, you brought it up earlier, $500 per person. I think there was 30 to 50 people all got a $500 ticket.
Right. That's some good cash.
And here we are looking with Christians at Romans 13, 1 through 7, conservative, reformed, evangelical, Bible-believing, red-blooded Christians who would rebuke Beth Moore and would rebuke Stephen Furtick and would deny that Rodney Howard Brown is a true Christian teacher, are also looking at this church in Greenville, Mississippi, of Wednesday night last week, saying you shouldn't have disobeyed the ruling authority. Right. Because you're supposed to be in subjection to them, submitted to them. Hogwash. Yep. Blithering hogwash. Why? And I know this is going to upset a few people when they hear it, because we've become spineless. We're spineless. And we forgot the part of the passage that talks about punishing the evildoer and rewarding the doer of good. And I might add, even though it doesn't say it specifically in this passage, who determines good and evil? God. Right. And his word. Who is the authority of who determines good and evil here on earth but the church? Yeah. And so the church is doing what they can for their people, and the government's coming in and punishing good and rewarding evil. And that's my problem. So we're just not in a comfortable enough position right now in the United States to say, well, that Christian should be shut. Christian, notice the air quotes, that Christian should be shut down, but that guy should be allowed to do what he wants.
Well, it's the bottom line. They can do it to them. They can do it to us. So you have to protect their rights, even if you disagree with their theology.
Even if they're being asinine.
Exactly.
Yep. Hey, there's that. You had to throw that in there. Bunch of asinines. But yeah, it is. It's true. See, in Australia, we just go like, oh, well, then just shut us all down. We'll go underground. Yeah. That's our mentality.
And I'm not necessarily, look, I think, and I've been weighing this out, saying this in some way, shape, or form, publicly through my Facebook page. But to some degree, I'm okay with a little bit of the thinning of the herd here.
All right.
The longer this goes on, I think the more we're going to find out that there's a lot more people who have been playing at being Christian, than are actually followers of the way.
Yeah.
And I'm not sitting here saying that I know who that is. And if you disagree with me, you clearly are not converted. I don't say that. I don't mean that at all.
You know.
But I think when push comes to shove, we're going to start to see who's going to cave and who's not going to cave. And I think a lot of us are going to be really surprised because we might find out it's us. Mm. And that should humble us. We should be thinking about that, especially here in the States. That needs to be on our mind because Christianity has been so freaking easy in the United States that no one's ever really been pushed to the point of having to say, no, I'm going to do this.
Yep.
And you've got idiots like me and who go out and stand on street corners and stand on boulders next to bike trails and on hot summer days and have the cops called on them all the time. And when you know what I do for a living, anytime I have interaction with law enforcement, I run the risk of my boss finding out, which could put my job in jeopardy.
Yeah.
So I'm not speaking from a place of comfort that says none of this is going to affect me. And as I told, I did another show on Sunday night for a couple of hours. And like this, some of the positions that I've been taking could jeopardize my job security.
Mm. Yep.
And not where I'm actually advocating, and you guys know this, I'm not advocating violence. I'm not advocating rebellion. I'm not advocating, terrorist activities. I'm being very vocal, and I said yesterday with these guys who ultimately ran off the people who were peaceably assembled in Raleigh, North Carolina. Those law enforcement officers should be run out of town on a rail. They violated the oath that they took to defend the Constitution of both North Carolina and the United States.
Yep.
They violated that oath. They're not valid to serve anymore because they chose to serve a tyrannical decision over the Constitution. And the ones who actually participated in arresting people, the 5 people who were arrested, they need to be arrested and tried for sedition. And that sounds incredibly rebellious, but who's the rebellious one?
Right.
Not just according to God's word, but according to the Constitution of the United States. Yes. I'm not the rebel here.
Yep.
And that's why what I said earlier was I will never take up arms against my country, ever. But I will take up arms to defend her.
Yep.
And that I know is just mind-blowing for almost anybody outside of the United States. Because it's not something that is ingrained in most people the way it is in this country.
Yeah.
It's not. We've lost it in Australia. World War II sorted out most of our fellas. They never come home. And so the generations after that have never realised that, there's going to come a point where you may need to defend your nation, your family, your friends, and, oh, no, you can't do that as a Christian. It's like, nah, crap, God gave you the ability to protect and defend that nation and your family and your friends. There's your call.
Well,
you know what I mean? It's just, it's really bizarre.
He made it a necessity for Christians in the United States by the way he providentially allowed for the Bill of Rights and the Constitution to be written.
Right.
And people and that's, and I mentioned last night, and I've talked about it several times. I've talked a lot about the Black Robe Regiment that was instrumental in sparking the American Revolution because they spoke out against the oppressiveness of King George in the English Parliament and how the colonists were being treated, and saying, look, we don't want to go to war. It was never a desire on their part to go to war. In fact, the idea of no taxation without representation, even in that motto, they were not saying we don't want to be British citizens anymore. They were actually doggedly fighting to be British citizens, saying, we want representation. We'll pay your taxes, but we want to be represented.
Yeah, we want to see the table.
Yeah, we want to see it at the table. And it was only after that, where they were rejected, that they said, now, because you're oppressing us, we're going to do what's best, and we're going to love our neighbors by standing up to the oppressor. And I spent years talking about the Constitution being the supreme law of the land and being the ruling authority in the United States, and at the same time accusing the founding fathers of being in sin for violating Romans 13, 1-7. So this is not, for me to be saying the things that I'm saying right now, I'd say this so as to not sound prideful. This is a major shift in one respect for me, in saying, look, I need to repent of accusing other Christians in the history of this nation of being in sin for doing what they did, because they weren't in sin. And I think Christians need to understand that we have to speak up while we can. And Erik, I know you got to get going, and I probably should too. And
we're going on 2 hours, so I think it's probably a good time to.
I'm humbled that you guys included me, and I hope that this has been helpful. So I got a couple of things I'll say, and then we can get this over with. In Nazi Germany, during the Third Reich, as the Germans were going around collecting people to get rid of them, after the war was over, they asked the Christians that survived. They said, well, why didn't you do anything? Why didn't you say anything? And the Christians said, well, they weren't coming for me. They were coming for the minorities, they were coming for the gypsies. And then, so I didn't say anything because it wasn't me.
Yep.
Sound familiar, Larry? And then,
yep.
and then they came for the Jews. I didn't say anything because it wasn't me.
Mm-hmm.
But when they came for me, there was nobody left to stand for me.
Right.
And for the Christians in the United States today, not only are we obligated to watch out for our poor neighbors, but we are also obligated to think this way. And this is what it looks like. When they came for the whacked out charismatic heretic, I didn't say anything because it wasn't me. I was glad they shut his church down. When they came for the fundamentalist on the street corner, I didn't care because I'm not a fundamentalist. When they came for the crazy KJV only guy like, what's his name out there in Arizona, Stephen John, I don't know. Stephen Anderson. When they came for Stephen Anderson, I didn't care because, well, he's crazy, whacked out KJV onlyist. And when they came for the independent Baptist, I didn't say anything because I'm not an independent Baptist. But when they came for when they came for the confessional Lutherans and the confessional Reformed Baptist and the confessional Presbyterians, there was nobody left to stand for me. And that might be an overreaction. I don't know. Maybe it is. But we're never going to know if it's an overreaction if we don't say it now while it needs to be said.
Right.
And Erik, I closed with this last night, and I'm going to close with it again. All of this, none of this matters. COVID-19 doesn't matter. Being a nurse, being a doctor, being a grocery store worker, being a garbage collector, being a postal carrier, none of it matters, whether you're essential or not essential. I don't care if you saved 3 million lives because you personally chose to stay home, or you personally went to work every day for 6 months. You didn't take a single day off because you were spending all of your time in an intensive care unit for people who were, sick with COVID-19 or whatever else. I don't care how many lives you save. I don't care how many measures you take to not cause this to spread. If you don't know Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior, this is all worthless. It's all worthless. And if you do know Christ and you're not taking the time to preach the gospel to people, during this time, then that's worthless.
Right.
People need to know they're mortal. They're going to die. And it may not be COVID-19. It could be a bus through the front of their house tomorrow.
Yep.
It could be a crazy guy walking down the street shooting people. It just doesn't matter. If they die without Christ, they're going to go to hell, and they're going to face his wrath for eternity. And people need to know. They need to repent of their sins. They need to turn to Christ for everlasting life. They need to recognize that he has given us a high eternal moral law that dictates everything that we are to do, tells us how we are to live, and he tells us don't break these laws, and if you break so much as one, you're guilty of them all.
Yes,
and then he provides the way out through Jesus Christ. He crushes his own son on the cross through the hands of wicked men. He is buried, and on the third day he rose again, like we celebrated here on Easter.
Mm-hmm.
And then he ascended into heaven, and he gave the church the command to go and preach the gospel to all creatures, not when it was safe, but just preach the gospel to every creature, so that those who hear can repent and believe. Recognize your sin, confess your sin, turn to Christ for everlasting life, and then go out and save the world in whatever way he's gifted you. That's what matters. And if we lose sight of that in all of this, if we lose sight of the gospel, we lose sight of God's great command for us to love him above everything else and to preach the gospel to our neighbor, then none of it matters.
Well said, brother. Amen.
So I thank you, gentlemen, for having me on. I hope it was helpful.
No, I think it was
Thank
very,
you.
very profitable, and hopefully we can have you on for another topic once hopefully this is behind us. We'll see how that goes.
Or maybe when it's not behind us, because I might be bored out of my mind.
That could be. Yeah.
No, I would always be willing to come on if there's ever anything I can contribute.
Excellent.
We love foxholes. We don't like rabbit trails.
Thank you very much, brothers.
All right. Bye,
Thanks.
guys.
Take care.
Push your heaps, man.
We'll talk soon.